Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast that explores how AI is changing media, journalism, and content creation. I'm Pete Paschal, longtime tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, and I'm excited to bring you fascinating conversations with fellow journalists, media executives, and the people building how the business of news will work in the future. So I'm doing something a little different for the podcast today. I recently hosted a webinar on AI risk and resilience for publishers, essentially looking at the broad idea that AI search engines are negating the need for audiences to visit publisher platforms directly. It's obviously a big topic, if not the topic, in how AI is affecting the media. And I spoke to one of the people who's looked really closely at the issue, David Buttle. David is the founder of DJB Strategies. He's an AI media consultant, and he's done detailed studies of this phenomenon for major publishers worldwide. He looks at their content, looks at how audience intent leads to that content, and from there, he can figure out which types of content are most at risk of being substituted by an AI summary. Even though the concept's straightforward, the consequences are actually fairly nuanced. What publishers want to know, obviously, is what sort of content strategy is more successful when faced with the prospect of AI substitution. So for the discussion, David and I are also joined by Will Barker of Blueconic. Blueconic sponsored the webinar, but the reason I'm sharing it here as a podcast is because I think it's actually a really valuable discussion. In fact, an urgent discussion, one that all publishers should be a part of. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar. We were presenting a couple of decks while we were doing it. So if you watch on YouTube or Spotify, that might be the best thing to do. But if you can't, that's okay. You'll certainly be able to follow from it and benefit from the takeaways. All right, without further ado, enjoy this deep dive into AI substitution risk and resilience for publishers with David Buttle of DJB Strategies and Will Barker of Blueconic. And we're live. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. This is how publishers can build AI resilient content strategies. I'm your host, Pete Paschal. I'm the founder of the Media Copilot, which is a newsletter. It's also an AI training academy. That means I teach editorial teams, usually media, PR, on how to use AI tools and weave AI into their content strategy. That's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is to say how AI affects content strategy. I actually write about that quite a bit, and especially the topic that we're going to talk about today quite a bit in my newsletter. And that topic is all about how AI search engines and chatbots are substituting the content that publishers create. So what does that mean? Well, as everyone knows, if you ask AI a question, it just magically gives you an answer, not a list of links. It creates those answers, of course, by harvesting publisher content or just content on the internet and summarizing it. So for media, this is really an existential problem in today's world. It's a really vexing one. What do you do about it as a publisher? How do you architect your content strategy around this phenomenon, which is already a very significant phenomenon and is certain to grow in the future? So that's what we're going to unpack today. Beyond just suing someone, beyond just making a licensing deal with an AI company, how do you think about the content you're creating in an AI world? So to do that, you of course need to unpack the problem, and we've got a couple of great folks here to talk about it. I'm first joined by my friend David Buttle, who is the founder of DJB Strategies. It's a media consultancy. He's also the former director of platform strategy at the Financial Times. I'm thrilled to welcome him. Good to see you, David.
Hey, Pete. Great to see you.
Awesome. And also we have Will Barker here. He is from our sponsor, Blueconic. Will's a manager for customer success over there, and he's here to talk about how to connect everything we're talking about with first-party data to cultivate more loyalty with your audience. Sign me up for that. Welcome, Will.
Hi, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, David, let's start with you. Before we begin, I feel like we need to really sort of set the boundaries of what we're talking about here first. So, you heard me just a minute ago talk about the phenomenon of AI substitution in very broad terms, but the central theme of what we're talking about today is that phenomenon, that act of AI summarizing content, that doesn't necessarily affect all content equally, right? And so tell me about that dimension a little bit before we get into the nitty-gritty of it. and also like kind of what I mean by effect, right? Because we're sort of still playing by these Web 2.0 rules of traffic and referrals and all this stuff. So just set the stage a little bit for me here on sort of the dimensions that we're going to unpack on this problem.
Okay, well, firstly, I'd say, I mean, it's happening to everyone, but as you rightly point out, the scale and the speed varies across different categories of publisher and within a publisher and across different types of content within a given publisher. I think there's a couple of reasons for that different pace. Firstly, reliance on Google varies dramatically across and within publishers. Secondly, Google is guardrailing the deployment of its search AI features for certain types of query. So for those types of queries where Google's not deploying an AI overview, it requires users to adopt new tools and place those queries into new tools. And clearly that relies on an adoption curve, which I'll talk a bit more in the future. So what we're seeing at the moment is an uneven effect across different publishers. I think the most useful thing that publishers can do is to look over the mid to long run, think about where these tools are effective and where they where given sort of full deployment and full adoption, they're going to serve user needs better than Google. And conversely, where are they not going to be effective, and where can publishers continue to attract an audience on an owned and operated platform? So that's what I'll talk through.
Right. And this is what I kind of want to unpack some of these definitions. So when you say effective, we mean effective at summarizing the content and negating the need to click, right? So.
Well, so I guess I mean effective at serving a user need.
Right.
I mean, what I'm looking at now is disruption to search, right? So this is basically a user has a need. They transform that need into a prompt that goes into Google, and that leads them to a publisher's website. And what's happening with when that journey is being disrupted is that's being transformed into a prompt that goes into Google or another service, and instead of going to a website, it goes to they just get a natural language response, and there's no need for them to go anywhere else. So that's the journey that we're looking at the disruption of. So the best way to think about that is, what are the needs, what are the intents that are being disrupted and that are best served by AI, and conversely, what are the intents that are not well served by AI, and therefore building a content strategy around those intents is likely to lead to resilience, right?
Right, exactly. And what I really want to kind of avoid is the sort of judgmental terms, right? Of like, that's bad or that's good. It's more like, what is I think we really want to sort of stay focused on like, what's AI good at and good at sort of serving in terms of a need, and then what it isn't, and then what the publisher's role is in there. Because I think once you sort of separate out of the sort of fears that I think people have, particularly like folks who might be at smaller publishers or not really sort of have dived too deep in this phenomenon yet. It's important to sort of unpack this very clinically and like think about, intents and needs and that sort of thing, and what's the best tool. And I think that's a good sort of first principle of what we're sort of talking about here. And as I understand, like, you've obviously thought about this a lot. You've done work with publishers on a very granular level here, and we're super grateful that you've been able to like put all that together and share it today. So I know you have some stuff to show us, so people can come away with a little bit more here and get into some nitty gritty. So why don't you jump right into what you want to show?
Yeah, for sure. So thanks, Pete. And so what I'm going to talk through today is is a methodology for analyzing AI risk at an individual publisher level. So since I set up my business about a year ago, and since then I've been focused on questions around technology and distribution platforms for media businesses, and a lot of that, as you can imagine, has been around the business model questions posed by AI. So I built a methodology. Well, first, I was commissioned by the UK's News Media Association to assess the scale of risk at an industry level. So that involved building a methodology that could model the level of risk that AI presented to the industry at a macro level. And then I've transformed that into a methodology which I've been deploying with publishers to analyze AI risk at an individual outlet level. So that's what I'll talk you through today. Please do, Pete and Will jump in with any questions as I move through this.
Sure, absolutely.
To start, I'm just going to quickly set the scene, and Pete's done part of this job for me, but I'm sure you've all seen variations of this technology diffusion chart over the last 2.5 years. We can now say with absolute certainty that the adoption rate of AI is extremely fast, faster even than social media, which has powerful network effects that drive usage. It's showing no sign of abating. And one of the leading use cases is information retrieval. AI, in short, is disrupting how we use the internet to retrieve information. And given the dominance of Google in those processes at the moment, that means it's disrupting Google. In The Verge's Remodeling the Internet study, just published a couple of weeks ago, they found that over 60% of Gen Z and 50% of millennials are using AI tools in place of conventional search. Similarly, the data in the bar chart here is from a recent study by the St. Louis Federal Bank, Vanderbilt, and Harvard Universities. It shows that the tasks where consumers find AI most useful, and I've highlighted where they're likely to be substitutional to Google, at least in some instances. And there's another piece of data that shows the same in a business context. So the adoption of these tools in information retrieval settings is clearly going to have an impact on publishers. And whilst it varies across categories, we know that Google, taken as a whole, is by far the most important source of external referrals. Now, there is a world in the future, and I believe a fairly likely one, not that far away, in which AI applications disrupt direct traffic to publisher properties. We're not there yet, not on any significant scale. So the disruption we're seeing now is coming from changes in search journeys that I described at the start. So broadly, that's a user having an information need that previously led them to Google and then to a publisher website. And now that same need finishes with Google or another AI tool like ChatGPT or Perplexity. So what I'm going to describe in the next slides is a methodology for analyzing this journey using the data assets that publishers will have, plus a little bit of user testing. And the outcome of this will be a view of where your content is at risk and where it isn't. And there's some other strategic outputs as well, which are helpful. So we need to do this. I'm going to move quite quickly. Mm-hmm. You can always, if anyone has questions,
I'll slow you down if needed.
Okay, brilliant. So we need to do this in 3 stages, and broadly that means moving backwards from the publisher and tracing that user journey back towards the intent. Firstly, establishing the relationship between content and search. Secondly, the relationship between search query and intent. And finally, some testing to understand how effective AI systems are at serving those intents. So I'll go through each of those 3 stages now. Stage 1, as I said, entails building an understanding of the relationship between content and search. In short, we're seeking to understand which types of search query drive traffic to which types of content. Clearly, this requires categorization. Categorizing search queries is reasonably straightforward. You can extract keyword and click data from Search Console and then iterate with an LLM to find the categories, and everyone will be left with another category. In my experience, that probably represents around 10% of traffic. When I did
can you give me an example of like categories when you're thinking about it here? Like, are we talking about?
Yeah, for sure.
What is it?
So I think it will vary. If you're an extremely niche publisher, your search categories will be even more niche. And if you're a general publisher, if you're sort of a general interest publisher, your categories will be quite broad. But for instance, for a national newspaper, they might be something like sports team name or news event. Obviously, if you're a technology, if you're a more niche technology title, then they're going to be far more narrow than that.
Got it. So these aren't like the categories you might find on a nav bar. These are more the type of query is what we're talking about here.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah,
the type. Make sure we're all grounded on that.
Yeah. So you need to categorize your search queries, and then you need to categorize your content, right? Mm-hmm. And to extract as rich insights as possible, it's helpful to categorize your content in different ways. There's straightforward ways, which you'll already do in the way you publish. So you'll publish under topic, you'll have different page types and formats. I'd also recommend looking at user function. What is that piece of content doing for your audience? Is it informing them? Is it distracting them or amusing them? Is it challenging them?
Right.
And these categories, again, will be different for each publisher. But when you think about what AI is good at and what it's not good at, you can see how these could lead to really meaningful insights later on down the line.
Right. And so the colors here, the red and blue, can you just explain what that is exactly? Because it sounds like one's higher risk, one's lower risk, or better served by AI is probably better.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet.
Right. All right.
What this does is each 100% of the bar represents all the search traffic that lands on that content of that category of content, and then the composition of that bar is the categories of search term, right? So content category 1, this deep red, they get probably 40% from search term category 11. So you've got that relationship. You know that this type of content I'm producing is heavily reliant on this type of search term.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes, because you have category twice. I get it. So the search category and the content category, two different things. Yes.
Exactly. We've got a relationship.
Now we're all on board. Okay, and this type. Yeah, I get it. The colors are all about what kind of category will get you to what kind of content, what
exactly
that content is serving. In terms of
correct. Well,
sorry, forgive me for jumping ahead on the risk part. I know that's later. It's the colors that are always throwing me.
Not a problem. No. It's a really good question. So yeah, exactly. This is just telling you, your traffic for this type of your search traffic for this type of content is derived from this type of search term. And this is really important because remember, it's the search term and certain search terms that are going to be served by AI really well, and some that are not going to be served by AI well at all.
All right.
Cool.
This is a measure of that, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the next stage 2 of the analysis, involves getting to the intents behind the search queries. So some of the search queries have obvious intents. For instance, Manchester United results. You know exactly what the user's looking for. Others, for instance, just Manchester United, don't have inbuilt intent. So we need to establish what they're likely to be. And it's not a perfect science, but there's a pretty robust way you can infer this from Google. Google's obviously built a business that generates $250 billion in revenue a year by understanding user intents really well. So that's the place to go in order to do that. The way to do that is by measuring and weighting the area of the results page used to display different types of information. So if the search term Manchester United, we can see that 20% of the real estate is allocated to, let's say, results, and we can infer that 20% of the users are seeking that information from the search. As I say, this isn't a perfect science, but the results are a pretty good approximation. The final step here is discounting some of the intents which would never lead to a user ending up on a publisher website. So, for instance, if it's a navigational search to the Manchester United website, you just take that out because that's not relevant. And then you rescale the results. And then the final part, the final stage of this methodology, with the intent understood, you can reform the search queries into AI prompts, and then generate a response using a model. So you could do this with AI overviews if AI overviews are being served. You could experiment with different models before the deltas are getting smaller between the different models. And you test the performance of these responses with real consumers. Super straightforward to create some research to do this. Effectively, what you need to know is, given a particular intent, how likely is it a user is going to be satisfied with that AI response? And conversely, how likely is it the user would still need to visit a subsequent destination website? You could use your own users for testing, which would make it highly relevant to your titles. That's probably a sensible thing to do if you're operating in quite a narrow space. You obviously need relevance, or you can buy a sample if you're a mass market title through a platform like Prolific. And once we have that data on how well each of the intents are served, we have to flow it back through the journey we've analyzed. So first into search queries. This tells us which types of search query are going to be disrupted by AI. And then, crucially, into the publisher content categories. This tells us which types of content are at the greatest risk of losing their search traffic to AI disruption. A note here, and I'm sure some of you are thinking about this as a question, this model looks generically at the performance of AI systems rather than tracking where Google is deploying AI overviews at any moment in time. The objective is to provide a more robust kind of long-run view of where the technology is useful and therefore what will provide long-run resilience, instead of just looking at, Google's loosened its guardrails a little bit around this type of query. A couple of slides on what we will find before I move on, because I'm highly conscious of time.
Yeah, for sure. But I really like that one because it's a key unlock of it's the framework of what to do, which is to say, you need to reverse engineer the path of user intent to content to find the user intent, test, and then you'll have a much greater sense of what is higher risk in terms of like AI substitution.
Exactly right. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there.
You really just like laid out the method. Like that slide, I mean, just go back to it really quickly because I think it's really important. Like this is the framework right here in terms of like figuring this out for you as a publisher, whatever you do, like, do this first. And then we're going to talk about like how to apply it in a second. But like this is really important. Anyway.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And then what do we find? So there are certain categories of user intent that AI is really good at serving. Like, for instance, travel, it's really good. Simple factual intent, it's really good. And then there are other types of intent that it's really not good at serving. One example I'll give is those that are inherently visual. For example, here's an example, which I extracted this morning, which is how to tie a bow tie. On the left, we have written instructions from ChatGPT. And on the right is a video, so front and center by Google. Helpfully, ChatGPT offered me a handy image to guide me through the process, which takes me from an untied tie through a series of physically impossible manipulations to a beautiful bow, which I then seemingly adjust on stages 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So, amusing example aside, the results will vary significantly from title to title when you run this analysis. Your content output, its degree of reliance on Google, and the effectiveness of AI at serving the intents that can lead consumers to it is specific to you. And by doing this, you'll be able to glean insights which extend beyond just understanding AI risk. You can model the impact on traffic and therefore revenues, helping you plan across a portfolio if you have multiple titles. It'll unearth those types of content that are resilient to AI replacement, as well as potentially uncovering combinations of content that just overperform. For example, specific topics and user functions you can find have big spikes. And then it will inform your promotional strategy. Where should you focus SEO efforts and which content will deliver against those crucial metrics that will lead to AI resistance, such as resilience, such as habit and on-site engagement. Finally, it can provide insights that will help you structure your advertising offering to protect the revenue from traffic declines and place your paywall against the content most likely to convert. Finally, and I've nearly finished now, but I know there are many publishers on the call.
I like this one. This is the money. Everyone pay attention, especially some of the people who've been asking questions. There's some really good takeaways here. Go.
I know there are many publishers on the call that won't have the resources or the time to undertake this analysis. And there's a subset of them who won't ask me to come and do it for them. So for this group, I've developed and published an alternative approach built around 3 criteria that can be subjectively applied to get a feel for where the risk lies. Firstly, distinctiveness. Is your content generic, commoditized, or is it highly original? Emotional resonance. Does that content evoke an emotional response, or is it just factual? And accuracy sensitivity. How sensitive are the implications of inaccuracy? Are you going to trust an AI response to deliver that information? You can find this methodology in an ebook called The Future Search. It's free, which I've written for a startup called Subject, which is SUBJCT, so subject without the E. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to get in touch directly, you can always ping me or add me on LinkedIn. My email's there.
Cool. Can you just go back to that one slide? I have a couple of quick
yeah,
things, because this is great. So, because this confirms honestly a lot of what I've sort of been writing about, and there's not a ton of data in the industry about this quite yet in terms of like what is a thing that well, you think there's kind of 2 ways to think about it, right? Like one is like what gets you ranking in a AI summary, which isn't quite what we're talking about here. This is about like what is content that, whether it ranks or not, is conducive to people actually coming through to your site and like needing sort of the almost the first party content here. And it's sort of, you have distinctiveness, and I sometimes use the word definitive when I talk about this. And I think it's not quite the same thing as uniqueness. It's close to it very much. It's sort of a close cousin, but it's almost like you have something that is would be wrong to almost leave out of the summary, but it's also like it's authoritative on this subject for usually reasons of unique information. Fair to say, I think. And I like, the emotional resonance is cool. Can I just ask you a quick question? Does that sort of imply that opinion content that is probably like a good bet here in terms of like being fairly AI resistant?
Yeah, I think exactly that. It's content which is inherently human, right?
Right.
And you think about it for a little while. And if you're a media outlet that's a destination for that type of content, then you're clearly going to have a high degree of resilience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you just can't get that, that equivalent of your star columnist. You can't get that from an AI system.
Well, and if you think about just even if you ask for a summary, like what are people saying about this issue, and even if that often is enough for you, I mean, I don't think it's enough for you all the time. Like I think it's almost like, I almost think about it as like playing poker, where you might lose a certain hand and play it a certain way just by luck. But over time, if you keep playing that hand in the same way, if you're playing it correctly, you'll make money on that hand. And that's kind of what I sort of think about here. Whereas, like, well, it doesn't mean all of your opinion columns are always going to rock and always have all the get all the traffic. But it is like, if that is a part of your content strategy, you're gonna hit singles. Now I'm mixing my sports metaphors and game metaphors, but you know what I mean. It's like consistency is key in everything, and by consistently doing that type of content, you will have a more resistant content strategy to this kind of AI substitution.
Completely right. Yeah, I mean, this is a complex landscape, and everything. Consumer habits are moving, and they don't move in a kind of in a binary way. We know that, but I think having a sense and ideally a sense underpinned by some data of the types of content that are not reliant on journeys which are going to be disrupted will allow you to think about how you're deploying investment, like resources. So yeah, it's absolutely not a sort of a switch you can flick, but it's about focus and shepherding your resources in the direction that's going to make a difference.
And can you just like unpack the last category here, accuracy, sensitivity, which is, obviously it's not the quite, you didn't just say accuracy. Yeah. So can you just sort of unpack that just a little bit to make sure we're all walking away with the right idea of what that is?
Yeah, for sure. So sometimes we need information to inform decisions which are really, really important. And we all know these systems do not tell the truth, and they're not designed well. They're not truth creating machines. They hallucinate, and that's just inherent in the way they're constructed. So if you need information to inform a decision that's really important with real world implications, and that could be at work, it could be about health, it could be about finance, you're probably going to want to check that. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's what the accuracy sensitivity is getting to. Now, this one actually, as the models get better and as hallucination rates drop, perhaps this one becomes a little less important. But at the moment, I think I look at my own use of these tools, and it's mm-hmm. I know where I check.
I'm going to throw my own speculation in here and say probably not, like at least not for a while, because I feel like, one, hallucinations are very inherent to the technology, and two, if it is that important, if it is like super sensitive, you're always going to check and probably check with multiple sources, depending on what it is. Right. So, I agree. For sure. That makes a ton of sense. This has been great. Is there anything that was not in here that you might want to mention in terms of like what is might be a good guide for folks in terms of developing sort of AI resistant content? Is the distinctiveness, emotional resonance, accuracy, sensitivity, that all kind of makes sense? Is there anything, say, on the next layer, I mentioned opinion content. Are there other types of content that, or even elements to content that might make it a little more resistant?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'd call out is, and it was in my bow tie example, is if something's inherently visual, if the user need is a visual user need, then right now these systems are not particularly good at surfacing visual content or video content in that way. Now, that's a technical limitation which I'm sure will be overcome before too long. But right now, there's certainly a pattern there.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. This has been great. Thanks so much. I'd love to answer some of the questions in the chat, but I also very cognizant of time. So folks in the chat, I've seen all the questions. I want to get to them. We're going to have some time at the end to make sure we can answer as many questions as possible. So please stick around. We'll answer some of these and some more that I'm sure are going to come up. But I really want to make sure Will has a chance to present as well. And I know, Will, you have some thoughts on this, on like how to tie this into sort of broader audience strategy, right? Because I really love having you here, and not just because you're the sponsor and all this stuff, but it is like one of the key things that is put AI aside, even in terms of being successful in media today. We've had to throw out the playbook of the 2010s, which was like scale media, let's search referrals, blah blah blah, anonymous traffic till infinity, which obviously didn't work. And now it's really all about audience, not traffic. It's about like, who are you serving and how do you serve them the best you can? And first party data is such an important part of that. It's been a huge subject everywhere I've worked in the last 10 years, really. So please, I know you have something to show us about sort of how to tie all this into that. So let's dive right into it.
Yeah, let me share my screen. We'll get started.
All right, let's get you. There it is.
Beautiful. So just very quickly, who is Blueconic? Who am I? Why should you be listening to me? Blueconic is a customer growth engine. We activate your data in a very privacy-first focus. Kind of the concept here is unifying data from a variety of sources, maybe your subscription data, your CRM data, email, on-site activity, unifying that, building segments, and then activating it in ways that help move folks from unknown to known, convert individuals to becoming paid subscribers, and helping to retain those subscribers over time. So I am a customer success, or manager of our customer success team over at Blueconic. I've been primarily focused in the media and publishing space for the last, I'd say, probably 4.5 years or so. Well, what I would say here is that we could probably be having a very similar conversation about 25 years ago with the shift and disruption of reader habits as they were shifting away from print to digital and going to the internet for accessing content. With kind of the impending doom of the third-party cookie that we had probably like 5-6 years ago as well, there was another disruption and a shift around the advertising piece. But I would say that regardless of these external forces, the key elements and how I've seen a lot of publishers respond have really stayed true. A lot of this is about building reader loyalty, or in some cases rebuilding it, finding ways to adjust to those external forces that are kind of changing reader habits. But at the end of the day, it's the content that matters. It's building those relationships and those audiences. So today I want to walk through a couple examples of how we've been really successful working with our publishing customers to do that. So getting 3 kind of like basic strategies here at a very high level. The first is really just thinking about like readers' interests, or, as David was talking about, like really like what are the intent? Why is somebody coming to your site? It's a variety of methods that we can use to personalize the content for an individual. Often it's, like, well, what have they been reading in the past? If they're a returning visitor. In other cases, we think of maybe somebody who it's their first or their second time visit. kind of think of like SEO as that on ramp to getting somebody to your site. What do we do once someone is there? How do we kind of increase their engagement and move them to, like, say, a second or a third page view? We could personalize that content with like what's been most active with other visitors who kind of look like that individual based on what we know about them. Or you might want to promote or kind of boost content that is maybe more opinionated or more emotional, right? Some of that AI resilient type of content that, is more resilient to those components. The other kind of strategy here is shifting those reader habits, right? So there's a variety of ways that we can increase traffic organically, bringing individuals or readers back to your site. A lot of these are not new strategies, but they're ones that I think we think about the urgency to implement. It's certainly becoming a lot more urgent today with the advent of AI. Those include, newsletters, push notifications. I've also seen some really AI resilient habits with readers, including, community comments, commenting at the end of articles, encouraging users to register so they can save articles or to share them with their friends, quizzes, puzzles, a lot of things that kind of feel like we're returning back to the old days a little bit of like a Sunday morning crossword puzzle. And the third is a focus or a strategy here on reader loyalty. So how can you unify your first party data for a more unified reader experience? 2025, folks expect that, whether I'm engaging with your brand on my phone, my laptop, and the mobile app, that I'm getting a consistent, really a value-based experience across those channels and kind of personalize that experience throughout.
Yeah, and I think sort of broadly, the umbrella thing I'm sort of getting from here is that, as you do sort of more of this, whether it's AI resistant or not, as you optimize your content to make sure people are coming to your site, and then using those same findings to make sure that uniqueness, that sort of factors that we were discussing earlier, is the stuff that is the stickiness that you're presenting to you. Basically, you're putting your best AI resistant foot forward. Once you get those people here, because obviously the big implication of a lot of this, that's going to get harder the more people are going to use these AI information portals. So it's really important that you have a really good journey once they do come to your site, and that not just the journey, but like all the sort of things you even have to offer is stuff that can make sure they stay there and become loyal to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it, if we think about building habits, it starts with awareness, right? So a lot of publishers have acquired or launched their own, like quizzes or puzzle capabilities, for example, but not every reader is familiar with them. So, being able to recognize those individuals who have never engaged, target them with some type of a quick promo or a banner to be like, hey, come over and engage, or, building that habit of, it's been 3 days since you've played a puzzle, right? Or you're on your 5th day of playing, like keep it up and that type of momentum. There's a balance here of trying to not go back to what feels like the late 90s internet, where as I'm going from page to page, I've got 50 different pop-ups and things that I'm interacting with that really just become more of a disruptor to a good customer experience. I've been working with a publisher in particular with really like, how do we lean in with AI to help improve that user experience while kind of maximizing like their business goals. And they've been using some agentic next best action modeling to kind of determine of like page view to page view, what should we be presenting or like helping to improve that user's experience to kind of either like drive them down a funnel or to convert them, say, from unknown to known or to become like a paid loyal subscriber.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like so many folks for the longest time were trapped at this first level thinking around this, which is like, someone clicked on this kind of article and it's about recipes, so we should show them more recipes. And it's kind of like, that's just so basic. But I also know just from, how talking to people, working in places, that's a lot of people are sort of still trapped there, or at least in that zone. And honestly, just the idea of user intent alone and AI resilient categorization, just incorporating that dimension, what you're talking about, it would sort of get you actually playing the game at a higher level really quickly. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just like the availability of data today versus maybe 10 years ago, and the ability to action off of it, shifting from, like some very simplistic approaches that are really like human intervention based of like, I'm going to try an A/B test and see what resonates, to kind of shifting to more of like an AI based model, where you're kind of like removing a lot of that manual effort and introducing something that is continuously learning and adapting based off of those reader habits, is really effective.
Sweet. All right.
So I wanted to share just a couple of examples of some publishers that we've been working with and ways they've been rebuilding some of those reader habits. The first one here, Washington Post, not a customer of ours, but working really closely with a fellow publisher who's trying to do kind of this, let's say like a Spotify wrapped style email. Most folks use Spotify today, kind of familiar with. At the end of the year, you get kind of a summary of, all the music you've listened to, the types of categories, the song you listen to most. What some publishers I've seen are kind of working towards is kind of like new products that help kind of like maintain and engage some of their most loyal readers, or kind of target those folks in a different way. So the idea here is kind of like a quarterly or a monthly like wrapped type of an email that essentially kind of just acknowledges how many stories somebody's read, the types of content, their favorite categories. If you have a really strong editorial team, like what are the types of favorite authors that somebody's been engaging with. And then at the end of that, there's a call to action where we're including personalized content recommendations. So it's not just the summary of what you get, but it's like, here's what we think that you should read next based on what you've been consuming to date. What I like about this is it's a great opportunity to direct traffic back to the site organically, increase your email click-through rates. And it's a nice little nugget or like something kind of unexpected and exciting from some of your most loyal readers that helps kind of keep them engaged and keeps them, coming back to the site.
Yeah, it's really smart. And even if you're on the verge of that, like I like that it just sort of makes you think about your relationship with this publication in kind of a different way, an ongoing way, and I think that's valuable, like a sort of even different parts in the quote unquote funnel, you know what I mean? Because you might be sort of maybe lower on it, but don't even think about that relationship and like, oh, wait, I actually have read a lot of articles at this thing. And then if you're more in the high, further down and already have that relationship, it's almost gamified. You want to be like, so for some reason, I want to beat everyone else and read more articles, etc. Really smart. Like the psychology of it is really interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is a fun one. The next one I want to share here, if we think about ways that we can organically bring the visitors back to sites or bring somebody who maybe has never been there before, you kind of think of like intent is one, but I like bringing in ideas that we've seen in other industries. Everybody I think is fairly familiar with probably like a refer a friend from, like a retail experience. If you purchase something, if you share, an email address with your friend or colleague, they might get 25% off. You've seen some publishers kind of adopting a similar strategy. In this case, the option here for paid subscribers is to be able to gift an article to a friend or a colleague. So if, I'm reading something and I find this to be really, engaging, I think it'd be really important for somebody else to read. I can simply click a button and I can gift this article to that friend. And what they do is, for that individual, if they share their email address, they're able to access that content for free. And there were a couple of really neat benefits from this one. So one is they had a really strong like click-through rate. So about like 2.1%. So if I referred a friend, we had about 2.1% chance of them kind of responding. They ended up getting a very large number of essentially like leads, right? So folks who shared their email address and said, yeah, I'm interested in reading this article. But there was an added benefit here where we saw a 9% reduction in churn for those paid subscribers who were gifting these articles. So there's this nice added benefit where that was kind of unexpected, where I said, I enjoy this subscriber benefit. I like being able to share this news with my friends. And like, this is a reason why I stay a paid subscriber.
Nice.
So if you're at various stages of the journey, kind of just want to like give you like a bit of an in here of like, how do you get started with your first party data strategy? How do you make sure that it's up to par? It's a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs here of a pyramid. But really, if you're very on or early on days here of like, I have a lot of anonymous visitors, I've really been chasing, like page hits to date. Then we're going to focus on, kind of converting those unknown visitors to known, right? So can we get an additional page view or two and getting them to engage with the content in a way that earns the right to, ask them to say, sign up for a newsletter or to register to read more content. And then kind of working our way up to, personalizing that on-site content, that messaging, knowing if they haven't engaged with puzzles or if they haven't created an account to start commenting at the end of articles, kind of moving them forward. We found that if somebody subscribed to, say, 2 or more newsletters for a particular publisher, they're more likely to become a paid subscriber. So how do we kind of encourage individuals to maybe shift from just, say, a sports newsletter to maybe more of that opinionated content, some of that content that's more AI resilient, so that we can kind of earn the right to say, here's an opportunity to become a paid subscriber to access some of that exclusive content. If you're more on the end of, I've done all of these things, but now I need to focus on like retaining those paid subscribers, we've got some really good strategies of identifying folks for credit card decline or folks who haven't been back to the site or opened an email in the last 30 days, ensuring that they're coming back. Overall, with the goal here of just kind of improving their reader experience. What I would say is just a couple quick considerations. Privacy still has to stay at the forefront. We think about consent, GDPR, CCPA. Content is king. This is really what's driving your visitors to your site. A lot of publishers who I've worked with have their data in a variety of silos. It makes it really hard to activate, and it slows down that time to response. I think what we've seen with David's graph here of just like the adoption of AI, we have to move quickly. It's really a mandate at this point. And then lastly here I would say is making sure that measurement is not something that we do after, but that, we're really kind of focusing on like what we have on the left-hand side really is KPIs that we can optimize of like, what is my percentage of, like known visitors on site? How many personalized messages do we have? Like what percentage of folks are converting to our newsletter or becoming a paid subscriber?
Sweet. So, thank you. Well, the last point is very well taken in terms of measuring success. That's always a huge thing in whatever you're doing. And I think that's a thing that's really rapidly changing in the AI world. So one of the follow-up questions I had for you, David, and Will, definitely chime in with your thoughts on it, is, we've talked about this sort of presuming to some extent sort of publisher business strategies sort of remain relatively the same. Like I sort of alluded to it earlier when I talked about sort of the Web 2.0 world. I don't know if anyone still uses that term, but you know what I mean in terms of like, a lot of business strategy sort of stuff centers around referrals, traffic, et cetera, and engagement. So as people, as some more and more publishers start making these licensing deals with AI companies and these AI portals, and AI becomes more of this part of the information ecosystem. How do like the levers of this change, or the sliders, or whatever we're thinking about? Like, because I sort of think about this like, okay, if I'm a publisher that does have a deal with one of these companies, like there is some interest in sort of even having my stuff be substituted by AI, like at least some of it to some extent. How should people sort of think about that in terms of like the rising use of AI and the rising relevance of it on a balance sheet?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but first thing I would say, it's axiomatically true that in future, a greater proportion of overall publisher revenue will need to come from licensing content as an input to AI systems. So the question for an individual publisher is, under what circumstances do you do that? And under what circumstances do you not? Now, I mean, as I talked through, it's a really dynamic marketplace. I think probably the sort of watchwords around that now were to have a clear focus on building an owned and operated business that is resistant to AI intermediation, and then the circumstances under which you want to license. Minimize your risk, right? And that means, because we don't know how this technology is going to develop or be adopted, you want the opportunity to get out of a deal pretty quickly if it's proving damaging to your core business, and the core business of publishers is going to remain monetizing owned and operated platforms, right? Because almost almost by definition, if there's an intermediary involved, you're probably seeping some value in that process.
You want that direct relationship with your audience, which
right. Exactly, a direct relationship with your audience, and optimizing your owned and operated, all of your owned and operated kind of activity around some of the metrics that Will spoke about, which is, how do you extract more engagement from a visit to a website? How do you form habits that aren't reliant on coming via a tech platform who arbitrarily can just turn down the dial? But I think experimentation around licensing, but experimentation in the context of risk minimization, right, would I think is the sensible way of approaching that.
Nice. I want to make sure some of the questions in the chat are answered here. I think there's a really good one here from Sam Gold. It says, "Hi David, have you done this analysis looking at split of engagement with content, step one, as opposed to just traffic or page views?" Let's start there.
Oh, I see. Yes. The answer is no. At the moment, it's about referrals, and I think that's probably reflective of the role that Google plays in the kind of funnel, if you like.
Right.
But there's definitely some interesting engagement type metrics would come out of doing this analysis. So, for example, one publisher I worked with, when we did the user function analysis and overlaid that with topic, as I mentioned on the presentation, there were these huge spikes of engagement. So, and this wasn't about Google, it was just generally that it basically suggested that there was latent unmet demand for these particular combinations of topic and user function. So whilst the analysis itself is focused predominantly on the Google traffic and therefore page views, there are engagement signals that come out of the data as well.
Nice.
It's a good question, Sam.
Yeah, he says it might show which categories are most at risk from a subscriber perspective, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, and conversely, which categories are likely to convert.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's another question here. What are the benefits, though, of appearing in those AI results as your band, I think you meant brand, shows up? Is it better to show up there or not at all, especially if you're a brand? This sort of speaks to what I was just sort of asking about as these sort of AI summaries become more and more the thing to compete for. Though I would say the exact benefits of appearing in that are not entirely defined yet. There's certainly a benefit, but it's not referral traffic, according to, certainly drastically reduced referral traffic. That said, though, and maybe this is more for you, Will, as that habit becomes more ingrained in the public, as more people are using it, and honestly, as Google and others move further down the AI path, because right now Google isn't substituting news content and published content as much. But certainly it's on the rise, in terms of just the use of AI overviews. Now there's AI mode, and that keeps getting upgraded day after day. There's a day coming when AI mode is just the default. I don't know when it is. But, the question is how does that part of the strategy, I guess, elevate? Start thinking about that sort of, not just the sliver of traffic you're going to start getting from it, but the branding, whatever else, what other benefits there are, how to start having some kind of relationship with people that are just seeing your stuff in summaries.
Yeah. So I think that some of this kind of goes back to just some of the concerns around the fact that AI can hallucinate, right? So there's a concept here of trying to validate or verify the information that I have, right? And in those summaries, if we've got the links for the sources, right, where I've got an opportunity to go back and let me fact check what I saw. This is a great opportunity from recognizing where that traffic is coming from, knowing that they're trying to validate, they have something that clearly, as David kind of mentioned earlier, this is probably one that it's a high important decision maybe they're trying to make. Sometimes I'm thinking more of a B2B publisher, where they're trying to help folks who are maybe trying to they're somewhere in maybe a purchasing journey, and they've got certain questions that they're trying to answer. And where I've seen some of our customers come in is recognizing those channels where somebody's coming in, and almost like that AI agent asking what's your intent? Like who are you? Why are you here? What industry are you from? Like, are you a director? Are you a VP? Like, what problems are you trying to solve, so that we can then redirect you to the particular type of content, right? If we know that you're very early on and maybe like a purchasing journey, and you're looking through our particular site to learn more about particular problems that they're trying to solve, then we can serve more of that like early on, top of the funnel type of content. But if somebody is like, I'm very low in the funnel at this point, like I need some very specific content, we can like redirect them specifically.
Nice. David, I'm curious, who's doing this well, or at least trending better toward the resiliency that you've been exploring? Will mentioned earlier, the Washington Post and some others that might be doing some interesting things in terms of cultivating loyalty. But I'm curious if you're observing that, these guys are doing more of this kind of stuff, or maybe they just always were and are more resilient to this phenomenon.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case at the moment. I think generally everyone's come into this sort of platform shift with a particular content proposition, and some are sort of dealt an unlucky hand in that sense, and some are not. I think what I would say is the brands that are doing it well are the ones that are trying to get their head around it. I mean, no one is going to make every decision correctly at this point in time, but it's about having a sense of where you want to head. What are the general areas of investment that you think are going to deliver resilience? Place bets in multiple places, and use data to inform decision making. Be prepared to respond in real time. It's at this stage, doing well means trying to get your head around this as an issue, trying to build some of those data points. The things we know, right, are the things that we'll talk through, which is like, if you can not be reliant on Google, basically, have direct relationships with consumers who turn to your brand for a distinct content, and they've formed a habit and a loyal relationship with you, then you're in a pretty good place regardless, right? And you're probably in a pretty good place before. That's.
Yeah. Will, both of you, I mean, what is, I think we talked about agents once or twice here. They got mentioned. I think anytime you talk about AI, you're obligated to have agents come up. But do those change how to think about this at all? I mean, when a good chunk of web traffic ends up being just kind of these bots going out and getting information, not just on a broad level of like crawlers, but like, queries that I'm making, like there's probably a day coming when it's, I instead of checking newsletters and websites in the morning, my agent just brings me my report, right? How does that change all of this?
Yeah, I've seen it kind of in a couple of areas. So I think like from especially publishers with a paid subscription model, right, of like blocking that content or making sure like it can't be scraped. A good example, maybe like a Sports Illustrated a couple of years ago, they had launched a subscription model, and it's really the high value, the high quality, like interviews, like the content that you can't get anywhere else that they put behind their paywall. And there's content that, said like their tagline was, like breaking news is always free. Like we recognize that this is, like sports, like game results, you can get those anywhere, right? But like I want to make sure that you're not blocked from getting that content if you're coming to my site, and that you build that habit of coming back here for that particular content, so that we can kind of like earn the right that, when you get to that exclusive content, we're kind of like asking for an email address, or, asking you to pay in order to access that content. So I think part of it is determining what type of content do I want to make sure that's available for those agents to access and to crawl, and that really high value content that maybe I want to give a teaser, but I want to make sure that I can like encourage the reader to come back to the site to actually access that content.
And just to add to that, I mean, just to emphasize really Will's first point, which is that these publishers need the right to treat agents as non-humans, which is really fundamental to this, because you can't monetize an agent in the same way as you can monetize a human. And what's happening at the moment is clearly as an industry, we're losing control of our intellectual property, and we need to take steps ourselves to address that through cybersecurity, legal means, and some publishers are doing that. But we also need to apply pressure to governments in order that they give us the tools in order to stop this, because otherwise we're going to face big parts of the ecosystem just being demonetized, which is not in anyone's interest whatsoever.
Right. And slowly but surely, there's sort of an economy around agents that's sort of emerging, but it's painfully slow. So, there needs to be some little more incentive, I think, put around that, and that the levers you sort of mentioned would certainly do that. I want to just really quickly, so we've had a lot of different publishers on the webinar, some large, some small. Particularly for smaller independent publishers who may not have a lot of means, especially with regard to cybersecurity or, the bot protection or even ability to sue people, et cetera. Like, what are the main sort of things you hope they're going to take away from today?
I mean, for me, I guess it would be trying to understand where that vulnerability lies, trying to do some modeling of some description, and building a longer run strategy for content and promotion that's oriented around the types of content that are resistant to AI intermediation, and then optimizing your entire business around habit, engagement, loyalty.
I would say, look at, start small. I've seen some really small teams do some really big, have a big impact. Really just starting with something as simple as moving individuals from unknown to known, or re-engaging those known individuals through your email channel. So I think just simply recognizing that I don't know this individual and finding strategies to encourage them to sign up for a newsletter to bring them back can have a significant impact that they can then, kind of creates a flywheel effect for, in engaging them and building that loyalty and those habits.
Awesome. Well, guys, we're kind of in the last minute here, so I want to thank you both very much for coming here and sharing these insights. I mean, I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience has a much stronger idea of sort of how to deal with this issue now. I'm just going to toss this in for anyone who needs more information, wants to reach out to anyone here. Feel free to reach out to me and David and Will. Here at the email at the bottom there. Appreciate everyone attending, and yes, there is a recording, so if you couldn't attend and you're not watching this live, hi, welcome, and hope to see you at the next one. Thanks again to Bluconic for sponsoring this.